Have you ever wondered how Formula One tracks are built? How Monaco turns its glamorous streets from this to this? Or how the Circuit of the Americas was built on 890 acres of undeveloped Texas land, and after 22 months of construction, it turned into this? Or how Abu Dhabi spent $1 billion to turn this empty desert into this? How Las Vegas shut down its bustling streets to host a race? Or even how Australia's Albert Park goes from this peaceful green space into a high-speed racetrack for one weekend each year? Well, in this video we're going to discuss how 9 Formula One tracks are built, and that includes Abu Dhabi, Australia, Baku, COTA, Las Vegas, Miami, Monaco, Saudi Arabia and Singapore. Each of these tracks have faced unique challenges which I'm sure you'll find interesting. So going alphabetically, this is how the Abu Dhabi F1 track was built. Building an F1 track is no small feat, but turning this, a literal desert, into this in just over 2 years' time is nothing short of a construction marvel. The Yas Marina circuit in Abu Dhabi is believed to be the most expensive racing circuit in history, with a reputed cost of over $1 billion. The Emirate of Abu Dhabi felt that Formula One represented a good way of making the Middle East more well known to the world, and after the success of the Bahrain International Circuit, the idea for the Yas Marina circuit was born. Construction began in May 2007, and after 30 months of intensive planning and construction, involving 14,000 workers and 35 million construction hours, it hosted its maiden race in November 2009. Sebastian Vettel took the victory, and just 1 year later in Abu Dhabi, he would win his first ever F1 World Championship. A little over 10 years after that, in 2021, the track entered the Formula One Hall of Fame with one of the most memorable and controversial endings in history. The Yas Marina circuit features 5 fully covered grandstands, a 227-berth marina, and the first hotel to have been built over a Formula One circuit. Sounds amazing, right? Well, the circuit was actually not very well received by both drivers and spectators, and so it underwent major changes to try and promote better racing. A task which is much harder than it may seem, but we'll come back to that later. What makes this track build even more mind-blowing is the fact it's just one part of the mammoth Yas Island, a 25 square kilometre tourist attraction with a reported cost of $40 billion, which holds 9 hotels, a Ferrari theme park, a shopping mall, a water park, a golf course, a beach, a concert area, a nightclub, and currently the fastest roller coaster in the world. But the question is, how was it built, and how did they do it in the middle of the desert? Before they could even begin thinking about the F1 track itself, a lot of groundwork had to be carried out. If you've seen any of the other mega projects built in the United Arab Emirates, such as the Palm Jumeirah in Dubai, you'll know that a technique called sand dredging is needed to build these islands on water. And despite Yas Island, well, being an island, this wasn't necessary as the land already existed. To separate it from mainland Abu Dhabi, they dug a 2-mile-long canal which the F1 track backs onto, making its title Yas Marina Circuit possible. The island was developed by Aldar Properties, who hired Sabaco WCT WLL as the main contractor for the F1 circuit. The 5.5 kilometre long track was designed by Herman Tilke, a former race car driver who has designed many other racing tracks such as Circuit of the Americas, Marina Bay and the Red Bull Ring. Impressively, the build was completed in a little over 2 years, which meant a constant construction schedule. At times, it was being built for 24 hours a day with a rotating worker schedule. In that period, they excavated 2 million cubic meters of soil, 200,000 cubic meters of steel was erected, and they used 235,000 cubic meters of concrete. After 30 months of grueling work, On October 7, 2009, the FIA granted its final approval to hold a Formula 1 race. Bruno Senna was the first driver to complete a test run on the circuit. It's undeniable what an incredible feat of construction both Yas Island and the Yas Marina circuit are, but there may be some issues in the future. The track is extremely flat, but over time the track is becoming bumpier as the landfill is settling, meaning at some point in the future it will require some major resurfacing. Speaking of which, the surface is made from grey-whack aggregate, which is shipped to Abu Dhabi from a quarry in Shropshire, in England. This same surface is used at the Bahrain International Circuit. It's popular amongst F1 drivers due to the high level of grip it offers, but this does come at the expense of higher tyre wear. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix is unique due to the fact that it was the first ever Formula 1 race to start in daylight and end in darkness. Because of this, it needed a system that can provide enough light levels required for television broadcast and the safety standards issued by the International Racing Organisation, which includes things such as uniformity and glare control. They commissioned Musco Lighting to carry out this mammoth task. They've installed lighting on other tracks such as the Jeddah circuit in 2021, which I will be making a video about before the next race in Saudi Arabia, so make sure to subscribe for that one. They implemented a 600 million lumen lighting plan on 4,700 fixtures in less than 300 days. After 15 years, however, the circuit needed a lighting upgrade. They wanted a new system built for both safety and sustainability. They opted for a total light control system, which saves 30% more energy than the previous HID system. The TLC system was installed on 4,329 fixtures, with 496 of those being colour changing, allowing them to put on light shows like this. The lights are switched on before the race whilst it's still daytime, so the lighting conditions on track remain consistent throughout for the drivers. Something else which lights up at the Yas Marina circuit is the uniquely designed W Hotel, which sits directly on top of the racetrack. Its futuristic shape is built from a 217-metre curved glass and steel facade known as the grid shell. This is covered in an LED lighting system that illuminates all 5,389 glass elements individually. The 499-room, 85,000 square metre hotel was built simultaneously with the racetrack and was opened on the 1st of November 2009 to coincide with the track's maiden F1 race. However, completing a project as impressive as the Yas Marina circuit only pays dividends if the actual racing is well received, which unfortunately it wasn't. In fact, Kimi Räikkönen after the 2009 Grand Prix said, "The first few turns are quite good, but the rest of it is shit." It quickly developed a reputation for poor racing following its second F1 race, the 2010 season finale, where Fernando Alonso saw his title hopes destroyed as he spent lap after lap stuck behind the slower Renault of Vitaly Petrov. The circuit simply didn't provide enough overtaking opportunities. But making changes to a track isn't as simple as some people may think. For starters, so much consideration has to be made in terms of where to make the changes, as most tracks have parts with limited flexibility. For example, they weren't going to demolish the W Hotel. You then have to make sure the surface material matches the original so the drivers don't feel a difference. And you have to be pretty confident that the suggested changes would even make the racing better, not worse. And after all that,
time was the biggest challenge. We had a race to deliver in December, and we had to go through an entire process of designing the changes, getting them approved, getting them reviewed by the FIA, making sure they meet all the standards of safety.
So after 12 years of racing at the Yas Marina circuit, it was finally time for a change. They broke ground on July the 1st, 2021, needing to be race ready for December. Their goal was simple: open up sections of the track and create new overtaking opportunities. To do this, they carried out restructuring in 3 key areas. At the north hairpin, they eliminated the chicane and made it wider. At the South Marina section, they eliminated 4 sharp corners for 1 banked corner, and around the hotel, they opened up the corner radius, allowing for a faster flowing circuit. These works brought the track length down slightly to 5.28 kilometers. So the big question is, did it work? Well, the quick and easy answer is yes, it did improve racing, but nobody will remember the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in 2021 as its first year of a new track layout, as it will forever be known as the year Max Verstappen became world champion on the last lap, or the year Lewis Hamilton was robbed of his 8th world championship, depending where you sit on that one. Just quickly, if you're enjoying this video so far, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps me out. How do you turn a quiet and picturesque park that looks like this into this? Formula 1 has been heading to Melbourne since 1996 to race around the transformed streets of Albert Park for 58 laps. The Australian Grand Prix isn't just a race weekend though, it's a pop-up festival, bringing in over 400,000 people across 4 days. Beside the 20 Formula 1 cars racing around, there's live music, merchandise stalls, meet and greets, food and drink vendors, other motorsport activities, and the iconic Melbourne Walk. But what makes this all the more impressive is when you realise the only permanent structure is the pit lane building. For 10 months of the year, it looks like this. Everything else you're seeing now, grandstands, hospitality suites, catch fences, bridges, runoff areas, and so much more are built and taken down within the space of a few months. So how do they do it? Well, the simple answer is 400,000 working hours, but it's a lot more complicated than that. Before we can understand the impressive logistical operation today, we first need to go back to 1985. The Australian Grand Prix became a round of the Formula 1 World Championship in 1985, but this was a street circuit in Adelaide, a demanding track enjoyed by fans and drivers alike. So that's why, when it was announced in 1993 that the race would be moving across the south coast of Australia, it was met with controversy. It's widely believed that Melbourne's failed bid for the 1996 Summer Olympics and rival city Sydney's successful bid.
The winner is Sydney, Australia.
For the 2000 Summer Olympics was a driving force, pardon the pun, to steal the Formula 1 race from Adelaide for a reported fee of $60 million. Bernie Ecclestone, the president of Formula 1 at the time, said it took just 10 minutes to strike a deal with Melbourne. But the controversy to host a Formula 1 race there wasn't just because Adelaide was a liked track. A series of protests were organised by the Save Albert Park group, who claimed the race turned a public park into a private playground for 1 week a year. One of their main grievances was the lack of transparency surrounding the decision-making process. The deal to switch to Melbourne finalised with no public consultation or a cost-benefit analysis. The race organisers and the government, however, claimed the economic benefits to the state outweighed the costs. Despite this, the race went ahead and it took just 3 corners for the Australian Grand Prix at Albert Park to gain worldwide attention. In 1996, Martin Brundle's Jordan car was launched into the air in, as you can see, a dramatic looking crash. Remarkably, Martin was so unharmed that he ran back to the pit lane and tried to continue the race in the spare car. These scenes meant F1 at Melbourne began in a very memorable way. Since, the event has just grown bigger and bigger. The 2024 Australian Grand Prix was the highest attended sporting event in Melbourne ever, with 452,055 spectators. So now we know why Formula 1 goes racing at Albert Park. How do they turn it from this into this? Preparation for the Australian Grand Prix starts just a few months after the previous race. The masterminds behind the whole operation say that hosting a race with temporary structures creates logistical challenges, but it also allows them to improve the experience each year. For example, in 2025, they redesigned fan areas such as Lakeside, Pit Stop Park, Melbourne Junction, and Motorsport Straight. Each area has its own branding and personality, giving the fans a wider experience rather than just a race. They also added extra floors to some hospitality suites, a new pontoon across the lake to allow for better fan mobility, and even a new grandstand. Construction begins roughly 2 months before the race, and it's estimated it takes 400,000 working hours to complete, and it creates more than 200 temporary jobs. At its peak, there are 150 trucks passing through each day, transporting the materials needed from their storage facilities into Albert Park. The schedule has to be watertight. The race date cannot be moved, so there's no room for setbacks. During construction, Albert Park remains very much a park that slowly evolves into an F1 track. This means a lot of the areas where the drivers will go racing remain open to the public for the vast majority of the build. It's not until closer to the event where specific areas such as pit lane are closed to the public, and then all access is limited in the final few days before the race. As I mentioned earlier, 99% of what makes the Australian Grand Prix is temporary. Only the pit building is permanent, but even then, that remains unbranded until close to the event where the teams take over. The main grandstand opposite the pit building is one of the first structures to be built. Then, there are 16 grandstands which are named after F1 drivers, and a new grandstand I mentioned earlier at Turn 6 which need to be built. These grandstands can hold just shy of 50,000 people around the track. They also erect 23 hospitality facilities and 113 suites, which accommodate a further 20,000 fans. These are the sort of facilities which are changed and improved each year. For example, they altered the angle at which a hospitality suite was situated to give the guests a better line of sight to the track. One of the most important parts of the build is safety. The Australian Grand Prix has seen its fair share of accidents, so keeping the public and drivers safe is paramount. Over 3,500 concrete barriers and debris fence panels are installed, spanning 10 kilometres of the track. They've also installed 9 special gates for 2025, which allows for the iconic post-race track walk to return. Interestingly, according to Steph's World, they actually initially erect the barriers in any random order, which creates weird sponsor alignments like this. Then, leading up to the race, they will paint the whole perimeter to match the current set of sponsors. Another key aspect of safety, particularly for the drivers, is the road surface. As you can imagine, the FIA have slightly stricter standards for what is acceptable for racing versus what's acceptable for a standard public road in a park. So it might surprise you to know, the Australian Grand Prix didn't have a full resurfacing until 2021 from its original one in 1995, which is impressive when you consider how much the residents of Melbourne use the roads throughout the year. They used this resurfacing to make some major changes to the track to promote faster and more exciting racing. Turn 1, which has historically been a bottleneck, was widened by 2.5 metres. Turn 3 was widened by 4 metres and the camber was adjusted. Turn 6 was widened significantly by 7.6 metres, which meant the cars would pass through this section 70 km/h faster than before. The biggest change, however, was removing the iconic chicane at turns 9 and 10 into a high-speed straight, increasing the maximum speed of the circuit to 330 km/h. Over the Christmas period in 2021, a team completed the modifications of the circuit, which included 70,000 square metres of resurfacing, using more than 9,000 tonnes of internationally developed high-performance asphalt mix. About a week before the race, pit lane becomes a hive of activity. More than 70 40-foot containers of sea freight weighing about 700 tonnes and another 900 tonnes of air freight are delivered and unpacked. This is also when you'll see the team's branding above the garages. And obviously, at this point, there's no public access in this area. In this whole build period, other features like bridges and runoff areas are also installed. And another interesting fact, thanks again to Steph World, they water the grass frequently in the weeks leading up to the event, meaning it's greener than any other time throughout the year, presumably so it looks good on TV broadcast. But besides the obvious construction tasks which we've discussed, there are jobs which you don't see but are critical for the event to run smoothly. For example, there's a dedicated team of 14 people which are responsible for accrediting over 17,000 people for the event. All of this accumulates to create one of the most unique and atmospheric races on the Formula 1 calendar. And then there's only one thing left to do. Take it all apart and put everything back in storage, ready to start building the Australian Grand Prix again in 10 months' time. When you visit an F1 race, or just generally travelling around, are you still carrying a bulky old wallet? The kind that barely fits in your pocket? Well, it might be time for an upgrade. Exeter have created the world's first trackable wallet, and they're redesigning everything that you carry. Their wallets are super slim, sustainable, and built with RFID protection so your cards stay secure. You can access your cards instantly with Exeter's signature trigger mechanism, holding up to 12 cards and cash while staying half the size of a regular wallet. And if you're anything like me and you lose things all the time, then their super slim tracker card connects to your phone so you can find it easily. From the 14th to the 30th of November, Exeter's Black Friday sale is live with up to 54% off site-wide. But if you use my code EverythingExplained by clicking the link in the description, you'll get an extra 10% off for up to 64% off your order. It's sleek, secure, and smarter than any wallet you've owned. That's Exeter. But now, how does Baku transform to host a Formula 1 race? Baku, the capital city of Azerbaijan, known for its medieval stone walls, ultra-modern skyscrapers, and since 2016, Formula 1. Thousands of workers transform its tight, historic streets into a 6-kilometre track safe enough for Formula 1 cars to race around, with top speeds of up to 360 kilometers per hour. Races at Baku have become synonymous with chaos. Red flags have become almost an inevitability. But the issue is, on a normal day, Baku looks like this. The roads are used non-stop by locals, so much of the work has to be carried out throughout the night to minimise disruption. To truly understand how the Baku F1 track is built, we first need to discuss how it was originally designed, then how the construction process actually works, and finally, why Formula 1 in Baku is so controversial. The Baku street circuit was designed by legend Hermann Tilke, who is responsible for other tracks such as Bahrain, Singapore, and Yas Marina. When he started to develop the track, the local organisers gave him no direction other than wanting the paddock building in front of the government house. He said the difficulty of designing a circuit with existing historic streets was an interesting challenge. They narrowed it down to just 3 designs and eventually settled on the 6.003 kilometre long track that we know today, one of the longest circuits on the calendar. It features the longest straight in Formula 1 as the cars blast down 2.2 kilometres of Neftçilar Avenue along the Caspian waterfront. Completely contrasting this is the Old City section. The track narrows to just 7.6 metres wide as it snakes past 12th century fortress walls. The iconic Turn 8 is the tightest corner in Formula 1, and if a driver gets it wrong by just a few centimetres, their race is over, as we've seen many times. I think it's fair to say that Baku has had its fair share of chaotic moments, and its layout is responsible for that. 2021 saw a record equalising 4 red flags in qualifying, and then the race gave us one of the most iconic photos in F1 history. Max Verstappen crashed out from the lead with a sudden tyre failure and subsequently kicked his car, giving us this photo. Hamilton then became a magician at the restart, allowing Sergio Perez to snatch the win. So now we know how it's designed. How do they change the streets from this to this? One of the first jobs when transforming the streets of Baku to be able to host a Formula 1 race is the paddock building, which, as I said earlier, is in front of the government house. For the race in 2025, The construction of the paddock building began around 6 months before lights out. This early start is critical because the paddock isn't just for garages, it also hosts media and hospitality, so the building requires a lot of infrastructure for utilities such as internet, water, plumbing and electricity. Doing it this early allows for inspections of one of the core structures of the track. A couple of months before the race is when the erection of the concrete, Tech Pro and Armco barriers along with the safety catch fences ramps up. The actual figures for these aren't made public, but for reference, the Monaco Grand Prix uses over 20,000 square metres of fencing, and that track is nearly half the length of Baku, so we can estimate it's in the region of 40,000 square metres of fencing. Around the same time is when the temporary grandstands are built. For 2025, they added 2 new stands, bringing the total up to 12 to seat around 20,000 spectators. These works are carried out wherever possible overnight because the race takes place on roads that are extremely busy when the race isn't on. Their goal is to cause as little disruption as possible whilst installing all the necessary components to host a Formula 1 race. Some of these busy roads are shut entirely for a week during the event, with others being reopened for multiple hour gaps both in the morning and the evening to allow for some traffic flow. One consequence, however, of racing on public roads is that some resurfacing works are required yearly to meet the FIA's stringent safety standards. Turns 8 to 11 was once a cobbled street which looked like this before. It went through major resurfacing for its inaugural race in 2016, which was controversial at the time, and now it looks like this. The track is cleaned with water jetting equipment before the road markings are painted, with examples being the runoff areas and the starting grid. Manhole covers and drains are welded down to ensure they don't fly up as drivers pass by. Something which they didn't do a good enough job of in 2019, as this happened to George Russell's Williams car. Safety improvements are made each year, such as adjusting runoff areas or repositioning barriers. When racing first began in Baku, a lot of these construction works were carried out by international contractors. Now, however, more than 2,000 engineers, technicians, installers and logisticians are all employed locally to carry out the task. During the race week itself, the workforce is expanded with an additional 1,500 staff, 2,000 volunteers and 1,400 marshals. And then, as with every city race, the deconstruction of the circuit begins just hours after the race ends. So now we know how it was designed and how they build it each year. Why is the Baku Grand Prix so controversial? From its inception, the Baku Grand Prix has been accused of sports washing, essentially using the glamour of Formula 1 to distract from Azerbaijan's human rights record. Groups like Amnesty International have repeatedly raised concerns about crackdowns on journalists and political dissent around race time. Activists say the government spend hundreds of millions on the event whilst ignoring domestic issues. Organisers have recently claimed that on average 12,000 foreign tourists are expected to visit Baku for the event, with each averaging a spend of $2,200. You can see why the locals would be frustrated, but this isn't a problem exclusive to Baku. Residents of other street circuits such as Monaco and Las Vegas undoubtedly feel the same. Unfortunately, it's impossible to host a street race without having some disruption to the local people. Despite its criticisms, Baku has become a bit of a fan favourite. Not because it delivers great wheel-to-wheel racing necessarily, but for the unpredictable chaos it can produce. It will never not be amazing to see how bustling streets transform to host a Formula 1 race. Texas, known for barbecues, music, cowboy culture, and since 2010, COTA. Before 2012, America didn't have a modern F1 track. Indianapolis had come and gone, and F1 needed a new home in one of its largest markets. So what did they do? They built one. Sitting just 20 minutes outside of Austin is the Circuit of the Americas, a 5.5 kilometer racetrack carved out of 890 acres of undeveloped land. It once looked like this, then $400 million and 20 months of construction later, it turned into this. 20 corners, a watchtower, the ability to host 120,000 fans, and its iconic 133-foot climb into Turn 1. But a project this big is unlikely to be executed without problems in the future. And COTA is no different, with the track needing major resurfacing works on multiple occasions. But to truly understand how COTA was built, we first need to discuss how it was designed, and then how it was built, and finally, how did they fix the problems? COTA started as an idea in 2010. Promoter Tavo Helmond and ex-MotoGP world champion Kevin Schwantz pitched it to Formula One's Bernie Ecclestone with one goal: bring Formula One back to America. On July the 27th, 2010, Tavo Helmond announced plans to build a racetrack on 890 acres of undeveloped land in southeastern Travis County.
I'm here with Tavo Helmond, who's the brains behind this incredible facility which is in construction here. Everything behind us is going to be the Circuit of Americas.
He also revealed Texas billionaire Red McCombs was the project's largest investor. To make it happen, they brought in Germany's Hermann Tilke, the same man behind circuit designs like Bahrain and the Red Bull Ring. Tilke's plan was to borrow the best bits from some of the world's most iconic racetracks and then turn Texas's rolling landscape into part of the circuit. The final design includes the 133-foot climb into Turn 1, followed by a blind hairpin. It sweeps through high-speed S's inspired by Silverstone's Maggots and Beckett's, then into a tight stadium-like arena based on Hockenheim, and the final section mixes low-speed technical turns with long straights where the F1 cars hit 325 km per hour before heavy braking. But the goal wasn't just to build a great racetrack, they wanted to build a venue. Austin-based Miro Riviera architect designed everything around it.
From the parking, the ticket building, the amphitheater, the grandstand, and at the same time we were doing other projects all around the track.
And the stunning 251-foot observation tower wrapped in a red double helix spine of steel lit by over 9,000 programmable LEDs. From the top of the tower, you can see the entire circuit snaking through the hills, the city skyline in the distance, and the heat shimmering off the asphalt. It's fair to say COTA's design is one of the best in the world, and it's appreciated by both fans and drivers alike. But the question is, how did they build it? Turning an open stretch of Texan land into a world-class racing circuit wasn't going to be easy, but it happened faster than almost anyone believed was possible. Ground was officially broke on December the 31st, 2010, and less than 2 years later, in November 2012, F1 arrived at COTA for the first time. That's just 22 months to turn an empty field into an FIA-certified Grade 1 circuit. So how did they do it? The first challenge was the massive earthworks that needed to be carried out. Engineers used GPS-guided bulldozers to carve into the undulating topography that gives COTA its character. They shifted over 1.5 million cubic meters of soil. The level of precision had to be extremely high. Even a tenth of a degree error in camber could totally alter a corner's flow at high speeds. The early groundwork also included storm drains, utilities, and massive soil stabilization to prevent the Texas heat and rain from warping the surface, which, as we'll come back to later in the video, might not have been quite as successful as they hoped. Every pipe, cable and contour had to match a digital 3D model built by Tilke engineers and architects in Germany, coordinated with construction teams across the US and local Austin firms working in real time. By early 2012, it had become one of the busiest construction sites in Texas. Over 550 workers were on site daily, peaking at around 700 during the heaviest phases. Concrete trucks ran nearly 24/7, and by April that year, they had poured 78,000 cubic yards of concrete across the circuit's foundations, pit buildings, and retaining walls. For the permanent grandstand alone, engineers installed 711.5 tons of structural steel, creating a sleek frame for the circuit's main spectator zone. Whilst all of this was happening, the iconic observation tower was being assembled nearby. Its 25 red steel tubes were craned into place one by one to form that striking vertical ribbon that now defines COTA's skyline. By mid-2012, the track's surface was ready for the asphalt to be laid. The top layer used a polymer-modified bitumen mixture imported and tested to FIA Grade 1 standards. It was laid in 3 layers, each just a few centimetres thick, to give the cars the perfect balance between grip and durability. But as I said a minute ago, the next section is about what went wrong, and it turns out COTA had some pretty expensive resurfacing works. Overall, the Circuit of the Americas construction represented a $400 million private investment, and it created around 1,700 construction jobs. It was one of the largest privately funded sport projects in the US at the time, and it turned a dusty patch of land into an American motorsport landmark. So now the question is, what went wrong, and how did they fix it? Within just a few years of opening, the Texas climate began taking its toll. The clay-heavy soil beneath the circuit began expanding and contracting with heat and rain, leading to uneven surfaces. By 2015, drivers were already complaining about bumps. Lewis Hamilton called it brutal, and MotoGP riders were even more outspoken, calling the track dangerous. To fix the worsening bumps, COTA undertook a partial resurfacing, but it wasn't exactly a success. By the time MotoGP returned in 2021, riders like Jack Miller and Marc Marquez described the track as a motocross circuit. So in late 2021 and early 2022, COTA called in engineering firm Tilke GmbH, which yes, is the same Tilke who designed the circuit, to conduct a full evaluation. They mapped the subgrade movement, reprofiled the most damaged corners, and installed new subsurface drainage to stabilise the clay. It was one of the largest midlife overhauls of any F1 circuit. But by 2024, they decided it was time for a full track resurface. They brought in Austin-based contractor Oldcastle Materials, and they used 18,076 tons of asphalt laid in 2 phases. Before resurfacing, they used ground-penetrating radar to detect and repair voids under the track. So, did it work? Well, when F1 returned later in the year, the drivers praised the smoother surface, whilst the track still retained some of its natural character, the small undulations that make COTA, well, COTA.
How do you make the entertainment capital of the world more exciting? Well, you build an F1 track right through it. Formula 1 is heading to Las Vegas for the first ever they raced around Caesars Palace car park in 1981 and 1982, but I mean, look at it. Let's forget about that for this video. Formula 1 is heading to Las Vegas in 2023 in its second attempt at making Sin City a mainstay in the yearly calendar. But this time, the cars will be racing straight through the boulevard. The new and improved layout has 17 corners and has one of the longest straights in Formula 1, nearly 1.2 miles. Drivers are expected to reach top speeds of 212 miles per hour and will pass through iconic mainstays such as Caesars Palace, the Fountains of Bellagio, the mini Eiffel Tower, and the brand new Sphere, which, by the way, the F1 will have control of during the race. Sounds amazing, right? Well, not quite. As you can imagine, to make the bustling streets of one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world safe for 20 giant boxes of carbon fibre, weighing nearly a ton each to fly around the city for nearly 2 hours, requires a lot of infrastructure, and that has sparked outrage amongst Vegas residents. But before we talk about the complaints from the huge disruption Formula One has caused, we need to discuss how they managed to build the enormous paddock building, laying the tarmac, all the fencing, temporary bridges, and so much more, all without shutting down the city. And make sure to stick around to the end of the video, because I've asked Max Verstappen's old performance engineer what we should expect from the track. And it seems that Formula One have already made a pretty costly mistake. Formula One announced in March 2022 that they would be hosting the Las Vegas Grand Prix from 2023 for 10 years, but this is different to every other race. Usually, an independent organiser pays F1 millions of dollars to be able to host, but this time, Formula One are fronting the cost themselves. So you best believe they need it to succeed, especially when the latest estimates are putting it at a cost of $500 million for this first year. The last thing they want to do is create a boring race, which, as I mentioned earlier, happened in 1982, when they basically raced around a car park. So that's why their goal was to build a track which goes past all of Vegas's landmarks. But this creates a big dilemma. The more of the strip you incorporate, the cooler the spectacle of the race will be, but the logistics of hosting become much harder. The project manager, Terry Miller, who has experience building sports stadiums, said, "The order of magnitude of this project is significantly beyond what NFL stadiums or NBL stadiums are. Some NFL stadiums take 36 to 48 months to build, in an empty parking lot with little disruption. The Vegas construction team didn't have this luxury. They had a little over a year to build a huge paddock building, relay the roads, create hospitality venues, install the fencing, add track lighting, and build grandstands, all whilst not closing the roads or access to the thousands of entertainment venues." So let's break down how they did it, starting with the pit building. Liberty Media, who own Formula One, commissioned a 300,000 square foot pit building on a 37-acre plot of land on the corner of Harmon Avenue and Coval Lane. The land which is built on cost them a whopping $240 million. Unfortunately for them, the site had about a 25-foot drop from one corner to the other, so they had to fill it in with 18 feet of earth. Despite this setback, they managed to build the structure in a little under a year. At peak times, there were over 500 workers alternating shifts to work 20-hour days. On race weekend, the bottom floor will be occupied by the teams and the FIA. There are 13 garages with 3 bays each. The second and third floors will host multiple luxury hospitality areas, including one on the terrace. And if you want to be part of the Paddock Club, you can pick up a ticket for just $15,000. And of course, to finish it with a touch of Vegas, just behind the building, they have the world's first F1 chapel. So yes, you can actually get married there. For the rest of the year, the building will become F1's new worldwide headquarters and will host different events and exhibitions. Oh, and I forgot to mention the ginormous LED F1 logo on the roof. As you can imagine, F1 tracks are not made of the same asphalt that you would find in front of your local shop. It's much denser and significantly smoother, so none of the existing roads were suitable for the race, and in fact, having existing roads only made the job harder. They had to rip out anywhere from 4 to 10 inches and then repave it. And as I just mentioned, it has to be extremely smooth, so one of the most important moments of laying it is the joint at wider parts. Even a very small ridge could lead to a huge accident. Free practice 1 ended just 10 minutes in due to an exposed manhole wiping out Carlos Sainz and Esteban Ocon's cars. Luckily, nobody was injured, but they had to check the rest of the track. Not the start they were hoping for in Vegas. Whilst carrying out these works, they had to ensure all tourists, residents and employees still had access to where they needed to be. They tried to do most of the paving work in the mornings when Vegas is quieter, but with tight deadlines, this wasn't always possible. In true Las Vegas style, they've painted the curbs around the track to resemble a pack of cards. And on the outside of the track, they had to install the concrete barriers and a 12-foot debris catch fence, of which they actually borrowed half of them from the Miami track. There is, however, one huge problem with the track, which will be answered by Max Verstappen's old performance engineer Blake later in this video. As it's a night race and is kicking off at 10 PM local time, a lot of lighting is needed around the perimeter of the 6.2 kilometre track. The actual amount of lighting is quite mind-blowing, there are 1,600 floodlights, 8.2 kilometers of metal truss to support the lighting, and 32 kilometers of cabling. All of this was ordered brand new for the race, but it was the same team who installed Singapore's lighting rig who did this. I've mentioned this already, but one of the key goals when constructing the Las Vegas F1 track was to allow the busy streets to continue operating. But when you run a track through a city, this becomes pretty hard. So what did they do?
We don't have a lot of overpasses in the resort corridor that allow traffic to move freely over the main circuit area. So we have to build the overpasses.
They built 4 760-foot-long 2-lane bridges. They're supposed to be as sturdy as those you might drive over on a highway, but they are temporary. This created yet another challenge. The bridge footings have to be specifically constructed to support the weight of the traffic, but not leave holes in the road when they're dismantled. Despite most of Vegas being a visual eyesore due to all the building work, many of the casinos are connected by trams and elevated walkways, so the access for tourists wasn't actually that bad. These walkways have screens in place so you can't see the race from there, and then they've installed barriers around them so you can't rip the screen off. There will, however, be times where movement around Vegas will be pretty closed. Each day of the event, Thursday, Friday and Saturday, roads begin soft closures at 5 PM and will be fully closed by 7 PM. They won't begin reopening until 2 AM. This is just an unavoidable part of having a street race, and it happens elsewhere, such as in Monaco. There are 4 main complaints with the Las Vegas Grand Prix: the disruption, the race time, the ticket prices, and the track itself. Everything discussed in this video has obviously caused disruption, and it would be an understatement to say residents are fuming. Traffic on Las Vegas Boulevard has been reduced to a slow crawl, and pedestrians are being funneled along narrow walkways. One resident even said, "Life as I knew it ended when the construction started." F1's response to this is that it's expected to bring $1.7 billion of revenue to Vegas, so it should be the very definition of short-term pain and long-term gain. Whilst the construction works have been a pain to Vegas residents, it has been made worse by the fact the $2.3 billion sphere was also being constructed at the same time. It only recently opened on September the 29th. As some of the big infrastructure is now in place, it should be a lot more streamlined from 2024 onwards. The second main complaint is the race time. Obviously, they want as many people watching as possible, so they decided that the best start time was 10 PM local. This means the race will start at 6 AM in the UK, 7 AM in mainland Europe, and 5 PM in Australia, but 1 AM for Americans on the East Coast. To make matters worse, qualifying will be at 3 AM East Coast time, so Vegas is a home GP where 48% of the country will have to stay awake till nearly 4 AM just to watch qualifying. The third complaint is one of the biggest for F1 fans, and that's the ticket prices. The cheapest tickets available were standing only in West Harmon, which were $500 per person, but sold out instantly. To actually sit down, the cheapest was $1,500 per person, but again, sold out instantly. The one redeeming factor is that the Las Vegas Grand Prix is the only in the world to offer complimentary food and drink. Usually, this is just reserved for hospitality packages, but I suppose that's the least they can do. However, the cost doesn't stop there. Fans also need a place to stay, and as you can imagine, hotel prices rocketed. But let's just imagine for a second you have an unlimited budget. What is the most expensive ticket you could buy? That would be $5 million. That gets you 5 nights in the 3-bed Nobu Sky Villa at Caesars Palace, plus 12 paddock tickets and a bunch of other VIP extras. The villa sits right above the racetrack on the strip with a terrace for 75 people. Evidently, the Vegas Grand Prix isn't accessible to the average F1 fan, but also I'm not really sure Liberty Media are too concerned with this, especially for the first year. And finally, the fourth biggest complaint is about the racing itself. The layout doesn't look like it's going to promote much intense on-track action, but there's a bigger issue. I'll pass this one on to Break F1, who used to be Max Verstappen's performance engineer, to explain.
Because the race is at night, the track temperature will be closer to the ambient temperature, and it's November in Las Vegas. The ambient temperature could be down as low as 5 degrees Celsius. Formula One tires don't really generate a whole lot of grip when they're cold. Also, considering the tarmac is brand new, the grip will be even lower than normal, and to compound that, there aren't any support races other than Formula One on the track this weekend, so that's going to be a really low grip track for most of the weekend. I expect most of the overtakes to be at the end of the long, nearly 2 kilometers straight down the Las Vegas Strip into turn 12. I think this is going to be a very unpredictable and exciting race. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the technical side of Formula One, once you've got to the end of this video, check out the link in the description below for my YouTube page.
So yeah, clearly the track temperatures could be an issue. Despite the contentious disruption, there is no denying that transforming the neon-lit cityscape into a high-stakes racetrack will be a great viewing spectacle. Formula One's huge bet on the Las Vegas Grand Prix may prove that in the world of racing, controversy can amplify the excitement. Even if the race itself won't go down in history books, the event certainly will.
Miami, famous for its beaches, nightlife, multicultural atmosphere, and its F1 races that take place in a parking lot. No, I'm not joking. This is the aerial shot of the Hard Rock Stadium where the Miami Grand Prix is held, and this is it in 2021. Turns 11, 12 and 13 were quite literally parking spaces. You may be thinking, building an F1 track in a car park must have made it easier, right? Well, from breaking ground to the first race, they had a timeline of just 12 months, which is hard enough, but in this time, the grounds were still hosting events like Miami Dolphin matches in the NFL, the Miami Open tennis tournament, concerts, and so much more. They had to phase the construction process to allow these events to operate without disruption, but also have the track ready in time. And then there's the complexities of the fake marina, which went viral, largely because of videos like this. But creating it was actually harder than you may think. To understand how they built the Miami F1 track, we need to discuss the difficulties of the design process, how it was physically built in under a year, and finally, the changes they made after facing some pretty strong criticism. Located at the Hard Rock Stadium complex, the Miami International Autodrome is a temporary circuit designed to have a permanent feel. In 2018, Formula One laid out their plans to host a race in downtown Miami, with a debut planned for the 2019 season. However, after logistical and political challenges, the idea was postponed. One of the key advocates of an F1 race in Miami was Stephen Ross, who also owns the Hard Rock Stadium. He commissioned UK-based Apex Circuit Design to lead the project, evaluating 75 potential layouts and simulating 36 of those. The site had many constraints such as minimal elevation gain, poor drainage infrastructure, and the biggest issue, the current facilities already in place to host other sporting and entertainment events. They eventually settled on the current 5.41 kilometer configuration. It features 19 corners with high-speed straights, 3 DRS zones, and has top speeds of 350 km per hour. It's fair to say the racing wasn't too well received in its first year, but we'll come back to how they dealt with that later. There was still pushback from local residents for this track, but a deal was worked out which would see the city receive $5 million in funding over 10 years for residents and businesses. Formula One agreed, and the contract was finally signed and announced at Imola on April 19, 2021, with the track needing to be ready for its first race on May 8, 2022. Just quickly, my goal is to hit 100,000 subscribers, so if you're enjoying this content, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. But anyway, as you can imagine, construction had to begin immediately. So how did they do it? Ground was broke in Miami in April 2021, with less than 12 months to turn the car park into a Formula One track. As I mentioned earlier, the whole process was phased so that the other sporting events went on as planned with no interruptions. Over this period, £14 million of steel and aluminium, or aluminum for my Americans watching, 1.3 million bolts and 1,130 tons of concrete were used. In total, 7 miles of concrete barriers and fencing were installed. Apex Circuit Design used an asset management tool called Apex Build to track each of these barriers as a separate asset. Their software allowed them to visually see if each item is in the correct place. This also makes the post-race pack-up much quicker. Some of the drivers, mainly Carlos Sainz and Esteban Ocon, were furious with some of the placements of these concrete barriers, as they both suffered high-impact crashes which would have been softened by the use of Tech Pro barriers. The drainage infrastructure on site didn't meet the required safety levels. The land is mostly flat, and the stadium is only 1.5 metres above the Atlantic Ocean. So to deal with this, a company called ACO installed 18,000 linear feet of drainage system around the track in a 9-month period. Formula One is the most technologically advanced sport in the world. Teams need access to tons of data instantly, whether that be telemetry, lap times, or weather forecasting systems. To cope with these demands, they installed an astronomical 56,782 miles of fibre and cabling. The road surface at the Miami International Autodrome is unique because it's made from a special mix of local lime rock and granite brought in by train from Georgia. Usually, lime rock is bad for Formula One tracks because it polishes smooth and loses grip, but Miami's lime rock has a high silica content, meaning its texture is like mini shards of glass. As the lime rock breaks down, it exposes more of this silica, meaning it stays rough and grippy. Well, so they thought anyway, but as we saw in 2022, this wasn't exactly the case, but we'll come back to that. Local teams built the basic layers of the track, but experts from Riffenberg Construction came in for the final surface layer. They used a method called echelon paving, where they laid the asphalt with multiple machines side by side, meaning the lanes would fuse together whilst hot, making the surface stronger. Overall, 24,000 tons of asphalt was used. If you watched the inaugural Miami Grand Prix in 2022, you'll know that they came under fire for the fake marina that they created at turns 6, 7 and 8. They did this by placing 10 yachts on a vinyl floor designed to look like water. Creating it isn't as simple as you may think. They had to find transportation vendors with specialist equipment and knowledge to remove the boats from water, make them road legal, which requires modification of the boat itself, and then stage them on the vinyl floor. There aren't many companies who can carry out this bespoke task. Aside from the physical construction, there was a lot of cosmetic work required. They wanted a theme to flow throughout the whole complex, and to combine the F1 experience with the stadium, which is why they opted to use the signature aqua colour wherever possible. They had 30 different renderings of the runoff area before settling on a design which mimics the shadow of a palm tree. In the final few weeks leading up to the first race, a team painted the concrete barriers to display the current set of sponsors. In total, 3,100 gallons of paint was used. There were periods where the track was being worked on almost 24 hours a day so that it was ready for its first race, which they successfully did. But as I've alluded to multiple times throughout this video, there were no shortages of complaints from fans and drivers alike for multiple different reasons. So what did they change? The Miami F1 track goes through changes every year, even without intentional improvements. That's because most of the facilities, such as the grandstands and safety barriers, are temporary, so they are dismantled and put into storage for the following year. The organisers of the Miami Grand Prix, however, made a multitude of changes to improve the race weekend, and these changes weren't just aimed at the racing itself. They moved the paddock inside the Hard Rock Stadium, creating what they labelled as a team village, allowing them to have expanded hospitality spaces. They also gave access to fans who bought a campus pass to level 300 of the Hard Rock Stadium, meaning they can look directly into this village. They added 3,000 new grandstand seats, installed more water refill stations, and created shaded areas for fans to escape the Miami sun. They even created different versions of the circuit to host multiple racing events throughout the year to expand into other motorsports. But without a doubt, one of the biggest criticisms of hosting Formula 1 in Miami was the road surface. The drivers claimed the grip was so low that it felt like driving on intermediate tyres despite it being dry. On top of this, the track layout didn't really promote many overtaking opportunities, so Tilker engineers were commissioned to oversee a repaving of the whole track. This didn't involve physical track changes, however, like removing the slow chicane which Lewis Hamilton compared to a B&Q car park. Despite this, the 2023 race was clearly an improvement as there were more on-track overtakes and the drivers, while not saying it's perfect, expressed more positive feelings about the racing than they did in 2022. I think it's fair to say the Miami Grand Prix organisers have achieved their goal of being bold and different. Not every decision they made paid off, but you've got to give them credit for constantly wanting to improve.
How do you turn the glamorous streets of Monaco from this into this? Nestled in the heart of the French Riviera lies one of the most iconic racing spectacles in the world. For one weekend only, thousands of fans descend into the tiny principality to watch 20 Formula 1 drivers navigate the tight street circuit at heart-racing speeds. But the Monaco Grand Prix isn't just a prestigious race, it's a transformation. Thousands of temporary structures are constructed in order to host the event. This includes the pit garages, hospitality suites, media centres, grandstands, and so much more. You've seen Red Bull's iconic energy station before, haven't you? Where Daniel Ricciardo did his post-win pool dive. Well, that's also a very complex temporary build, but we'll come back to that later. To put in perspective just how big of a transformation it is, Monaco has a population close to 36,000 people. It's estimated that over 200,000 people will arrive into the country, more than 5 times its population. So the question is, how do they do it? And how do they do it in just 6 weeks whilst keeping some of the busiest streets in the country open for its residents? But before we get into that, since when did Formula 1 race at Monaco? Racing in the Principality began on April 14, 1929, having been organised by the president of the Automobile Club de Monaco, Anthony Nogues. He now has a grandstand named after him. The winner of the first race, William Grover Williams, drove a Bugatti Type 35B, and he pocketed a whopping 100,000 French francs. It joined the F1 calendar a little over 20 years later in 1950, with the maiden winner going to Juan Manuel Fangio, a man who would go on to win 5 world championships and become one of F1's most decorated drivers. Not long after, British driver Graham Hill became known as the King of Monaco after winning it 5 times in the 1960s. But for most F1 fans, when they hear the words Monaco Grand Prix, they think of Ayrton Senna. He holds the record for most victories at the street circuit, that being 6, including 5 consecutive wins between 1989 and 1993. The track layout has had a few modifications in its 74-year history, but what has changed the most is everything around it, making the setup operation much larger. The most obvious example of this is the safety standards. Until 1969, when the first Armco barriers were installed, if a driver went off the track, they would crash into whatever was there, that be a building, a tree, or even a lamppost. They pretty much just raced on the normal streets minus the parked cars. Thankfully, by 1972, the circuit was almost entirely Armco-lined. To make sure the whole track is protected, both for the drivers and the spectators, 21 kilometres of safety rails are installed, around 1 kilometre of TechPro barriers, approximately 20,000 square metres of wire netting, over 3,000 protection tyres, and finally 800 fire extinguishers, one for every 15 metres of track. And then during the race itself, there are more than 2,000 people situated around the track. This mostly comprises of volunteers like the marshals and stewards, but also people like police and doctors who are paid. Evidently, the safety standards of the Monaco Grand Prix now are significantly better than the early races, but considering the circuit hasn't changed much, so the corners are still tight, but now the cars are much bigger, it remains a very dangerous track for the drivers to navigate. Carrying on with the theme of safety, The roads need to be perfectly smooth. Any imperfection in the 3.37 kilometre track, which the drivers reach a maximum speed of 290 kilometers per hour on, could cause a very serious accident, something the new Las Vegas street circuit knows all too well. Rightfully so, the FIA have stringent standards on what condition the road needs to be in for the race weekend. But this creates the first logistical dilemma. The streets the drivers race on are used every day by the residents of Monaco, so in an effort to cause as little disruption as possible, in the 4 weeks leading up to the race, they do most of the road resurfacing at night time. Each year, they usually resurface around a third of the track. The roads are also a lot more accessible than other street circuits. Each day, the roads are closed somewhere between 6 AM to 7:30 AM, but are back open between 6 PM and 9 PM. Even though it's a small window, this still allows for some passage through the track, unlike street circuits like Singapore, which are closed for the whole race weekend. Just below the pit garages, they literally have a nightclub on the track which anybody can walk up to. As we've already touched on, one of the main issues with setting up a Formula 1 race in Monaco is its size. It's smaller than a lot of people realise. The whole country could fit inside New York's Central Park. This means that there's not a lot of room to build all of the temporary facilities on site. This is why most of them are brought into the country by over 600 trucks and trains from storage facilities in Nice and Italy. Another benefit of being built away from site is that it also reduces the setup time. The whole operation begins roughly 6 weeks before the race. The pit garages specifically arrive in 120 different sections, which a crane pieces together almost like Lego. By the time they're completed, they provide teams with the same technology and needs as their permanent counterparts at other tracks. Michael Ferry, who is a vice president of the ACM, said the biggest challenge is building the race control tower. Inside of it, you have TV, FOM, FIA, ACM, emergency services, and so on. That's a lot of people with a lot of different technology requirements. The 1,000 tons of grandstands are also, of course, temporary. Due to the nature of being a tight street circuit, there are a limited amount of places to build them, which means Monaco has the smallest capacity of all Formula 1 races at just 37,000. The amount of people watching the race, though, is much higher, as hotels and apartments overlooking the track all sell their balconies. These packages may be less affordable for the average F1 fan, though. Then there are, of course, the iconic yachts lined up in the harbour section of the track, which again, don't come cheap. But one of the most mind-blowing temporary structures at the Monaco Grand Prix is the Red Bull Energy Station. Red Bull's energy station became an iconic part of Formula 1 when Daniel Ricciardo did a celebratory belly flop after his win at Monaco in 2018. But many fans aren't aware that this is also a temporary structure. When designing the energy station, Red Bull needed it to be transportable as it's used in 9 different locations across Europe, but also it needed to be built in just 32 working hours. To reach these goals, every part that makes up the build is packed away in order, so when they are unpacking it, that part can be added on straight away to maximise efficiency. For example, every load-bearing beam can be attached within 7 minutes. On top of that, most of the cabling and infrastructure is already pre-built into the walls. The build becomes even more remarkable when you realise that 250,000 kilograms of timber, 48,000 bolts, 85 windows and 15,000 kilograms of glass are assembled in less than a week. Building the energy station for Monaco, however, adds one more layer of complexity. Due to the space restrictions in the harbour, the energy station has to be built on a floating barge in Imperia, Italy. It then has to be hauled 20 nautical miles down the Mediterranean coast to Monaco. At this point, the harbour master and a team of pilots help steer the 300,000 kilogram barge past the expensive yachts and into position. Finally, the team on the ground comes in to make sure it's ready to host the drivers, teams and VIP guests. This includes 40,000 cans of Red Bull, a kitchen to deliver 13,000 meals, and also the F1 cars on show. I was lucky enough to visit the energy station in 2022, and it really is as cool as you think it would be. And just like that, the tiny country of Monaco builds enough infrastructure for nearly 6 times its population, hosts the Formula 1 race, and within 3 weeks returns to the glamorous streets that billionaires from around the world call their playground. The atmosphere that fills the streets around Monaco on race weekend is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Often walking around the streets is more fun than watching the race itself.
Jeddah. This high-octane street circuit, where the cars fly around at a speed of up to 341 km/h, has only been part of the F1 calendar since 2021. The timeline from conception to the first race was less than 2 years. The Corniche area of Jeddah turned from this into this. When plans were announced that an F1 track was to be built in Saudi Arabia, the criticism didn't end with the expected sports washing allegations. This missile strike happened just kilometers from the circuit during the race weekend in 2022. But after an emergency meeting, the race went on, despite pictures like this. But the risks didn't end there. Due to the tight and fast nature of the track, one tiny mistake and you'll end up having a huge crash, as Mick Schumacher found out the hard way in 2022. Sergio Perez labelled Jeddah as the most dangerous circuit on the calendar. But before all the controversies, the area looked like this. So how did they do it? To understand that, we need to discuss the design process, the build itself, its incredible lighting system, and finally, probably most mind-blowing of all, the fact that this circuit is just a placeholder for the long-term Saudi Arabia F1 track coming in 2028. The design process for the Jeddah street circuit actually began on Google Earth to try and understand which areas of Jeddah would best suit a racing track. Formula One sent a delegation to Saudi Arabia in January 2020 to assess potential sites, and it quickly became apparent that the Corniche area of Jeddah stood out. It's got great panoramic views of the coast, and its long sweeping roads allowed for a fast and exciting circuit design. The coastal strip is actually reclaimed land, which created complexities in the construction process, which we'll come back to soon. In October 2020, Saudi Arabia appeared on a provisional F1 calendar for the 2021 season, which was shown to the teams. Just 1 month later, in November, it was announced that the city of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia's second biggest city, would host this inaugural race. Tilke Engineers, founded by Herman Tilke, the man responsible for designs of tracks such as COTA, Red Bull Ring and Baku, were commissioned for the Jeddah circuit. When designing the track, there was a real desire to move away from a street circuit concept that involved 90-degree, slow-speed corners with a stop-start nature towards a fast-flowing layout. It's fair to say they achieved that with a 27-turn, 6.174km track, making it the third longest track on the calendar behind Las Vegas and Spa. It has an average speed of 251 km/h and a top speed of 341 km/h, meaning it's the second fastest circuit behind Monza. Just quickly, if you're enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. More than 99% of you watching aren't subscribed, and I'd love to get that down to 90%. Anyway, how was the track actually built? The Jeddah F1 circuit was built in record time, around 12 months from breaking ground to being race ready. As I alluded to earlier, one of the first challenges was understanding the ground and the soil which the track was to be built upon. This was key, as previously some of this land didn't exist. It was part of the Red Sea. The narrow nature of the track also added to the construction complexities. At its peak, there were 1,250 people working around the clock to get the circuit ready for its first F1 race in December 2021. Saudi Arabia doesn't get rain often, but when it does, it's usually very heavy, so the circuit needed a great drainage system. They installed a 7.1km slot drain to be able to cope with the potential heavy downpours. On the opposite end of the weather spectrum, Saudi Arabia often experiences extreme heat, so picking the right road surface was crucial. They opted for a polymer-modified bitumen in the asphalt, which allows for it to have durability and elasticity. Essentially, it increases its resistance to cracking, which improves its overall longevity. In total, they put down 37,000 tons of asphalt. Where they could, they sourced materials locally. So for example, they sourced the bitumen from nearby city, Mecca. To make the track safe for both spectators and the drivers, 3,300 pieces of concrete wall were placed around the track, along with 3,000 Tech Pro barriers. As the months went by, the track was nearing completion, but one glaring thing was missing. The decision to make Jeddah a night race was a pretty easy one. They simply don't get the cooler weather, so for the comfort of the fans and to promote better racing, it was the obvious choice. However, to host a night race for both the drivers and fans' visibility, the track needed a mega lighting system. And as you can imagine, the FIA have very strict standards on lighting uniformity and glare control. Musco Lighting was commissioned to carry out this task, who have previously shown their ability to meet all demands on other circuits such as Bahrain and Abu Dhabi. They had a timeline of just 8 months to install the 2,212 light fixtures by using more than 20,000 kilometers of electrical wiring. They opted for a total light control LED system which meets all the requirements, gives them more flexibility, and allows them to put on light shows like this. The idea of hosting an F1 race in Saudi Arabia was always meant to be on a permanent track. Prince Khalid said, "We love motorsport and we didn't want to wait until that project is finished. So the idea is to start with a street race and then, when the track is ready, we'll move to that location." The project he's referring to is this, Qiddiya, one of Saudi Arabia's current mega projects built to be the home of everything sports and entertainment. Not only will it have the world's longest, fastest and tallest roller coaster, but it will have this, the Qiddiya Speed Park. The circuit will run counterclockwise and feature over 350 feet or 108 meters of elevation change. There will be 21 corners and the cars will be able to reach speeds of up to 200 miles per hour, which is 320 kilometers per hour. It will be the longest track on the F1 calendar. One of its most striking sections will be this, nicknamed the Blade. The corner will rise 70 meters or 230 feet, making it equivalent to a 20-story building. The roller coaster I mentioned earlier, by the way, will intertwine with the edge of the F1 track. Since its conception and the start of construction, it's had multiple delays, but it's set to host its first F1 race in the 2028 season. So yeah, everything about this track will be the definition of bigger and better, when it's actually complete, of course. Singapore, known for its tropical humidity, spectacular skyline, having this in its airport, and since 2008, Formula One. For one weekend each year, the Marina Bay area transforms into a 5-kilometer F1 track that winds around the Singapore Flyer, the iconic Fullerton Hotel, and even across a century-old bridge. Without a doubt, Singapore is one of the most demanding circuits on the calendar. The intense humidity means drivers can lose up to 3 kilograms in body weight through sweat. And it's not just the conditions they have to battle, its high speed and tight cornered layout has meant a safety car has been deployed in every single race except 2024. But for most of the year, it looks like this. So a lot of infrastructure is needed to transform it into this. Thousands of people work around the clock to build temporary grandstands and install the necessary safety infrastructure. Then there's the lighting, which, as you can imagine, is no simple task to illuminate the track while providing the drivers with uniform conditions. To truly understand how the Singapore F1 track is built, we first need to discuss its design, then the build itself, its incredible lighting system, and finally, why it's one of the most dangerous circuits on the calendar. The origins of the Singapore Grand Prix go back a lot further than most F1 fans will know. It was actually first organised in 1961 to host Formula Libre, and it was known as the Orientier Grand Prix. Formula Libre literally means free formula and allows for a wide variety of purpose-built single-seater racing cars. In 1966, it was then renamed the Singapore Grand Prix. Just 7 years later, however, in 1973, the event was discontinued, likely for multiple reasons, including its extremely dangerous track and the inconvenience of having to close roads for the event. The idea of hosting a Grand Prix in Singapore became dormant for 30 years. That was until 2007. Bernie Ecclestone and Singapore signed a deal with a simple idea in mind. F1 needed something new, and Singapore wanted a global showpiece. The solution? Formula One's first ever night race. The initial track concept was made by Hermann Tilke, the German track designer known for many other F1 circuits, such as Baku, Yas Marina, and Bahrain. His design was then refined by KBR. They took on engineering, planning, integrating permanent and temporary elements, and adapting the design to Singapore's urban constraints. The main of these urban constraints was using the public roads in a dense urban area with little room to build new roads. Eventually, the track was finalised, and in its current iteration, it's 4.94 kilometres long, the cars do 62 laps, and they reach a top speed of 325 kilometers per hour. The cars pass through iconic sections like the high-speed Marina Bay Straight, the slow and technical Anderson Bridge and Fullerton Complex section, and the Raffles Boulevard. The track's had its fair share of changes since its introduction in 2008. Most memorable, perhaps, is the removal of the Singapore Sling Chicane at turn 10, which had these very unforgiving curbs. It was no longer part of the track from 2013 onwards, and I think you can see why. More recently, in 2023, a new straight was added between turns 15 and 16, which has meant the current lap record sits a little over 1 minute and 34 seconds. So now we know how it was designed, how do they turn it from this to this? Singapore is different from a purpose-built racetrack because almost everything is temporary. Unlike other street circuits, however, like Monaco, the paddock building in Singapore is permanent. The 350-metre-long structure broke ground in August 2007 and was finished by July 2008. It was originally meant to be 18,000 square metres, but it was expanded to 23,000 square metres. Its build cost was estimated to be 40 million Singapore dollars at the time, which adjusted for inflation now is around 45 million US dollars. A hefty cost, but it means one huge piece of infrastructure is permanently in place ready for each race. They also upgraded the pit building in 2023. 1,396 rooftop solar panels were installed, which should generate over 800,000 kilowatts annually, enough to power the pit building for a full month around the race. One of the first temporary builds happens in June, and that is the lighting structure, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Around this time is also when some of the grandstands around the pit lane are partially built. In August, the safety infrastructure begins to be installed, and they ramp up the construction of the other grandstands. Over the course of several weeks, a crew of over 4,000 people begin placing the 2,068 concrete barriers, erecting the debris catch fencing, and piecing together the grandstand modules. Much of this work is carried out overnight in an effort to cause as little disruption as possible to the public who use these roads. The city's roads are closed in phases as construction advances, and roughly 1 week before the race is when full closures are in place. But because the drivers race on the same roads that the public drive on, they have to carry out targeted resurfacing works each year. Essentially, they replace worn or problematic sections rather than the whole track, places that are prone to bumps, porpoising, or drainage issues. In 2022, for example, 3 sections were resurfaced specifically to reduce porpoising. Manholes, drains, and utility covers are welded, bolted, or sealed. Weeks before the race, the road markings are painted, which include the runoff areas and the starting grid. At this point, Singapore is basically ready to host a Formula 1 race. But as we know, it's a night race. So how does the lighting work? Singapore's race relies entirely on artificial illumination. Drivers need visibility, uniformity, and no glare, so a powerful and complex lighting network is needed. DZ Engineering currently carry out this task. The first step is to audit the inventory stored off-site to ensure everything is in working order before it arrives at the track. Then, the teams begin mounting floodlight pylons and trusses. Across the circuit, more than 1,600 LED floodlights are installed on low trusses, about 10 meters high, which preserves the city skyline and minimizes visual intrusion. Each of these floodlights weigh around 42 kilograms and have zero warm-up time, meaning they can instantly be turned on. These new Philips Arena Vision Gen 3.5 LEDs replaced older systems in 2023. Overall, more than 220 kilometers of cables need to be laid. By late August, the lighting system is mostly installed, so the focus then shifts to testing and troubleshooting. Engineers check for uniformity, glare, or flickering lights. Any misalignment could temporarily blind a driver and cause a crash, which thankfully hasn't happened in Singapore, but that doesn't mean to say it's not one of the most dangerous tracks on the calendar. I mentioned in the intro that the drivers can lose up to 3 kilograms of body weight during the race, and that's no joke. At lights out, ambient air temperatures tend to be around 30 degrees Celsius, with humidity between 70 to 90%. Now imagine what that feels like in the driver's cockpit whilst wearing a fireproof race suit and driving intensely for 62 laps. They actually feel temperatures closer to 60 degrees Celsius, and their internal body temperature can raise dangerously high to 39 degrees. So not only do they have to contend with trying to win a race and not crash, but also they're fighting dehydration, mental fatigue, and loss of grip on the steering wheel. That contributes to the fact Singapore has had a safety car every single year except 2024. But also, it's the tight corners, bumpy street surfaces, potential for rain, and the boxed-in feeling of the walls. The rundown to turn 1 saw this freeway crash between Max Verstappen, Sebastian Vettel, and Kimi Räikkönen. All three of them were out of the race before it really even began. Not all of the safety cars in Singapore are from accidents though. 2008 saw the infamous Crashgate. Nelson Piquet Jr. purposefully crashed his Renault, which essentially gifted his teammate Fernando Alonso the win. One of F1's most controversial moments. But one of F1's weirdest moments was this in 2015. A British man casually strolling around the circuit meant that the safety car had to be deployed, and then he was arrested. So yeah, Singapore certainly knows how to transform its streets into a race which can create some serious carnage. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks again to Extra for sponsoring it. Make sure to use the link in the description and use code EVERYTHINGEXPLAINED for up to 64% off your order.